Good morning, and welcome to Lake Country Unitarian Universalist Church. My name is Lois Ramicus, and my pronouns are she and her. I am your worship leader for the week. Some of us are bringing our best selves to the space. Some of us are bringing our struggling selves. All of us are welcome here. All of us are loved. All of us are imperfect. But we're here to drop our defenses and trust that what happens in this space is powerful and life-giving. Together, we affirm that this day and our being together can make us each braver, more compassionate, and wiser than when we woke up this morning. We welcome you here. Let us move into the service willing to be authentic with each other, honest within ourselves, and connection in all forms.
Life becomes religious whenever we make it so. When some new light is seen, when some deeper appreciation is felt, when some larger outlook is gained, when some nobler purpose is formed, or when some task is well done. With this in mind, I invite us to begin our worship.
Unitarian Universalist congregations covenant with one another to affirm and promote specific principles based on shared values. We live out these values within a living tradition of wisdom and spirituality that is drawn from sources as diverse as science, poetry, scripture, and personal experience. Our chosen reading today is titled, Open Up the Doors by Reverend Linda Susan Ulrich. Open up the doors. Push on looming wooden arches embroidered with ironwork. Brace your shoulders against the weight of history unmoved. Slaw off the musty smell of unused joy and stored up sorrow. Knock rust off the hinges if you have to, and let your breath precede you inside. Open the doors more. Make room for a shaft of sunlight to cross the threshold. Give the dust mote something to dance about. Peek through a single slice of possibility and name even the half-hidden truths you see. Open the doors wider still. Pour yourself through the gap. Strut or sneak or sidle as best suits you. Cleanse whatever scrapes your skins and bind up the wounds that keep you from entering whole. Open the doors as far as they will go. Draw on the strength of the stones beneath you. Ground yourself in a firm sense of who you are. Stand as a beacon welcoming the next seeker and shine beyond the lintel and sill. Open up to all that you are. Heighten and broaden your connections to the world around you. Broaden your definition of neighbor. Grow into the largest target of grace that you can muster. And pray to become a gateway for even greater love and compassion. Open up the door, my friends, lest we keep the stranger out and condemn ourselves to the prisons of our own making. Here ends the reading.
All right, show of hands, before I get started, who before coming today has heard of the person Sophia Lyon Fahs? Raise your hand. Anybody? Anybody? One. Okay, good. Two. All right, that's about what I figured. Even if you've been here for a while and you haven't heard her name, you may have heard one of her more famous quotes, which is oft repeated during UU Christmas Eve services. Each night a child is born is a holy night. Does that one sound familiar? Some? Yeah, we've heard that one. Well, if you haven't heard of Sophia Lyon Fahs, hers is a name it would be good to become familiar with because she is a titan in this faith tradition. Almost single-handedly responsible for the way we approach religious exploration today. When you hear me say that we do religious exploration, not religious education, meaning that we don't tell kids what to believe, but rather we expose them to a wide variety of thoughts and ideas and invite them to learn how to have a broad perspective, to wonder, to imagine, to wrestle with ideas, to draw from the whole of human knowledge, and to find the answers to life's bigger questions that are right for them. A good bit of that framework came from Sophia Lyon Fahs. Today I'm going to offer a very basic introduction to the person and her work, but my intention is to use this type of experiential learning she might have used to demonstrate the power of the approach that she actually pioneered. Sophia Blanche Lyons Fahs was born in 1876. She was an editor, an author, a teacher, and a religious activist who led a revolution in Unitarian religious education until her death in 1978. So think about that, 101 years old. Fahs' teaching and writing focused on a method of experiential learning that she hoped would enable children to develop their own ideas about religion and spirituality. She was actually born in China to Presbyterian missionaries who moved to Wooster, Ohio at age 3. The religion of her upbringing was serious, devout, sturdy, and sincere. Fahs received her bachelor's from the College of Wooster in 1897, which was a rather rare thing to happen back in those days. She then received her master's from the Teachers College of Columbia University in 1904 and her BD from Union Theological Seminary in 1926. Of her education, she said, "I decided I must have a theological education. I wanted to have the same education ministers have because I wanted to understand the things that they understood." For 3 years, she served as the principal of the Union School of Religion after receiving her Bachelor of Divinity degree. And from 1927 to 1944, she also served as one of the first female faculty members of Union Theological Seminary as an instructor in religious education. After Fahs left the Union in 1944, she became the editor of Parents Magazine. Yes, that same Parents Magazine that exists today. In 1945, she joined a Unitarian congregation, and in 1959, she became the first female professor to be ordained as a Unitarian minister. She was ordained by the Cedar Lane Unitarian Church of Bethesda, Maryland. And beginning in 1937 and continuing until her retirement in 1964, Fahs worked for the American Unitarian Association as an editor of children's materials for a new religious curriculum called the Beacon Series. Fahs strove to create a theology that restored human emotions and human experience to their right place as foundational building blocks for an enlightened liberal faith. She devoted her life to the big questions rather than the big answers. Her motto as a theologian, philosopher, and educator was emotional experience first. She said, "No one can give a child wisdom or faith or spiritual growth. These things can only grow from within. People learn by experiencing the world for themselves, by feeling their own feelings, and by seeing and touching and doing." She once noted that the educational process in an age of science should no longer be regarded as the transmission of one faith in order to seek a commitment to it. We are assuming an open-ended education in religious thinking and living which makes room for intelligent change in response to new knowledge and new insights. See, it starts to sound like what we do, right? She's the one that came up with all this stuff. After an exhaustive study of world religions, she offered 5 fundamental reasons why religion was still needed in the age of science and reason. And for the sake of time, I'm going to leave you to research what these 5 reasons were. But I will share the story that she used to make her point about these 5 reasons, which was her preferred method of transmitting ideas anyway. She would tell an old story from Uganda about a blind man and another man that could not walk. Everyone else in the village was occupied with fighting off an attack from an enemy tribe that was trying to break in. But these 2 disabled men were forgotten. And if they did not get out of the village quickly, then they would both probably perish. Finally, the blind man offered to carry the crippled man on his shoulders, providing the other man would guide him to the next village. So the immobile man became the eyes for the blind man, and the blind man became the legs for the immobile man. And the 2 together found their way to safety. So it may be with science and religion, she said. Each is incomplete in itself, representing but a part of our human potential. Science and religion need one another as partners. They need to learn how to talk frankly together, to exchange their values, and to give their criticisms without causing offense. Lessons we could probably hear today. Loyalty to inherited religions of the past, no matter how wonderful they have been, must become secondary to loyalty to new and growing truths from whatever sources they may come. So, with that little introduction, I hope I've piqued your interest. And if you're an educator or a history buff or into women's studies, I hope you will do some more exploration of this fascinating woman. It was this type of interest that led my wife, Reverend Denise Colley, to conduct more research about Olympia Brown and Florence Buck, two influential faith leaders of the time, right here from Racine and Kenosha. And it was during these explorations that she learned that Sophia's thinking was actually influenced by both of these women. A point I lift up because I promised last week that I would, but also because I want to stress once again that in a faith where the congregations are at the top of the org chart, it is the congregations where the next brilliant ideas are encouraged to come from. Which brings me to today. Not unlike many other churches around the country in these rapidly changing times, there is a small but growing group of members beginning to once again wrestle with ideas about how we might do church differently to ensure that our delivery remains relevant and compelling in a world that is changing faster than many of us are able to even think about keeping up with. So to that end, and in honor of Sophia Lyon Fahs, the rest of today is going to be devoted to a bit of experiential learning, which means y'all are going to be moving around and we're going to learn something from the movements that we do. Next question. Has anyone ever heard of a process called progressive stack? Raise hands. Anybody? 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 One? You've been to like a GA or something, haven't you? Like, yeah. Okay. So progressive stack is basically a way to try to level the playing field. If you've got a large group of people like we do at General Assembly and there's 2,000 people in the room, how do you sort of prioritize whose voice gets heard? A progressive stack invites anyone who believes for whatever reason their voice might be a little marginalized in that particular space is invited to come up and line up to the microphones first so that those voices get prioritized. Progressive stack, okay? So in a few minutes, I'm going to invite us to get up and move to a different area of the church in this sort of stacked way. And the thing I want you to begin considering before I ask you to begin moving is this. How much influence do you think you have? How much do you feel like you have ability to influence this congregational system? How much power do you personally believe in this moment you have in this particular system to influence the decisions made by this system? What happens on the stage on Sunday morning? What color of the paint in the hall? What we serve for coffee? Anything. And so I'm gonna have us move around a little bit because I want to embody this a little bit. So this front third section of rows, I want you to make your way down here if you're starting to think like, you know what, I don't really have a whole lot of power in this system. Like if this is your first time here and it's your first time walking into this space, you probably don't feel like you have any power. You'd be up front, right? So without moving yet, I want you to begin imagining where you think you would fall. Less power, some middle level of power, or more power in this particular system. So pick an initial spot. Next, I'm going to name some markers of power that exist in our society. And I'm wondering how they show up in this particular community. I want you to think about how those markers show up for you in this setting. So for example, if you identify as neurodiverse, do you believe from your lived experience that this has had a positive a negative, or no impact on the level of power that you are typically granted in the system. But I really want you to think about how that impacts you here in this system. Neurodivergence is a whole series of diagnoses, psychological diagnoses like ADHD, autism. Yep, thank you for that question. Continuing on, other things. Does your age have an impact on your perceived ability to impact the direction of this community? Do you feel like you're too young to have your voice heard? Do you feel like your time has passed and now it's all the young people that are making all the decisions? So you might switch where you are based on that. What about gender? Are you male, female, non-binary? Do you believe your gender expression gives you more or less power in this particular system, or does it have little impact here? I don't know. That's a personal decision that you have to think about. Again, focus on this system. You very likely may feel different levels of influence in your family, in your workplace, or in your friend circle. What if you walked into a temple or a mosque and that wasn't your religion of upbringing? One thing to notice here is that one's perceived level of influence varies greatly depending on the setting. What if you have white skin? What about your body shape? What about your sexuality? What if you have tattoos? What if you've been granted a title like Reverend or Roshi or board member? What about tenure in this community? How much power do you have if you're brand new versus if you're a founder of this community? What about your pledge amount? Each of you that has followed along to this point will have processed each one of those intersections in your head uniquely based on your perceived position in this system. And you likely have many others that I didn't have time to name. Your interpretation of our UU values and principles will impact where you position yourself. So, based on all of this, I'm going to ask you all to get up and move around and reposition yourself. I get a couple more instructions. So 2 instructions. First of all, as always, this is voluntary. If you don't feel comfortable moving your seat for any reason at all, simply stay seated when I ask folks to rise. But don't use that as an excuse not to move. I know most of you can move around and it'll be okay doing it. Now I got one more brand new instruction that has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but I know you can hold 2 things at the same time. So, perceived power in this system, lower, middle, higher, okay? And now I'm doing this for the worship arts people and for the people that are thinking about doing church differently. I want you to position yourself on this side of the room if you would like to see more heady, debatey, thinky, information kind of services. And I want you to position yourself on this side of the room if you'd like more heart-centered, spiritual, soul-filled, movement, music, emotion on this side of the room. And then pick this middle spot if you'd like some combination of both. Sometimes thinking, sometimes heart, sometimes a meld of both, okay? So does that all make sense? Lower power, medium power, higher power, head, heart, both, okay? All right? Any questions before I get moved? Okay, all right. I'm going to invite you now to stand up. All right. My worship folks, the people that are deciding how we do church, take a look around and get a feeling of what this community is telling us. There's some over here, there's fewer over, I thought there'd be more on the spirituality side or whatever, but I think most people are coming in the middle. So we don't want to go all heady, we don't want to go all heart, we want a mixture of things. I'm going to keep that in mind. Okay. So what you have done here for this vertical, the lower, medium, and high, is you've just created a progressive stack. You've arranged yourselves by your own perceived power to impact change in this particular system. What would our annual meeting be like if we arranged ourselves in this way first, and then invited those that feel like they have less daily influence in the system to speak first. Wouldn't that raise up the voices of the new folks, or the younger folks, or the people that we're trying to figure out how to make sure that we're doing things right? Imagine if we set it up so that they were invited to speak first. What might our democracy look like if this type of process could be implemented at a larger scale? In a sense, this exercise is a simple way to practice sharing more power with marginalized voices in a community, to prioritize the needs of newer folks, to tip the scales a bit to ensure that more voices are included in the discussion than the voices that the system has been unwittingly or perhaps intentionally prioritizing. Now, I could stand up here for 30 minutes more and talk about power differentials and their impact on decision-making in human systems, but there's nothing that I could say up here that would make the point nearly as impactfully as you have just experienced. Look around. Where do you see yourself in the system? Notice where you are. If you're up front here, do you wish you had more power? Do you wish you could pick the cookie first? As the kids were learning, If you're newer, the people behind you could give you lessons of how they gain a little more power in the system, right? We could teach each other to move up. Power is not a bad thing. Power is just a way to make things move. Sophia Lyon Fahs was a woman who was able to have her voice heard during a time when that was still quite uncommon. Imagine how different our world would be if she had not pushed her way into very important conversations still being held by the menfolk of the day. Now imagine how many more brilliant ideas might have the opportunity to emerge if we are able to remain open to the type of new ideas that are needed to do things like save our struggling democracy. Blessed be, and may we be courageous and creative enough to make it so. All right, folks, I hope you enjoyed our little experiment today. If you're in the back of the room and you feel like you have more influence in this system, look at the people in front of you. And if you don't know some of the people in front of you, track them down at coffee hour and ask them what they're here for and what they hope for and what their dreams are, because that's a good way to start to get to know people. And to my tech people, I got people in the middle here. It looks way better on Zoom. This is good. Okay. All right, everyone, go forth, be curious, always be exploring, always looking for new ways. This is the source of how we're going to save ourselves. Have a great week.